Hi guys. Today we will start with the story What Happened in a Medieval Village. Dawn over the village. The sky is still dark, but the first pale streaks of dawn begin to paint the horizon in soft silver and pinkish hues. A thick, motionless mist hangs over the distant forest, like a blanket covering the sleeping land. The cold air is still, disturbed only by the occasional cry of a night bird. From the moss-covered, cracked bell tower, dewdrops slowly drip. They gather on the wooden beams, falling one by one to the damp earth below. The village is still asleep, but nature is already awakening. Somewhere in a ravine, a rooster calls out, followed by others, and soon the entire countryside echoes with the chorus of birds, filling the morning with a quiet sense of life. At the edge of the forest, a thin column of smoke rises. A shepherd, who spent the night near the herd, has lit a small fire to warm himself. Down in the valley, the icy, clean stream murmurs softly, winding through moss, roots, and stones, as if in a hurry to wake. The first rays of sunlight break through the leaves, falling on the thatched roofs of peasant homes, on stone fences, wooden gates, and narrow footpaths, worn smooth by countless feet. The houses remain dark, shutters closed tightly, but smoke begins to rise from some chimneys. Fires are being rekindled to reheat yesterday's stew or bake the morning bread. In the yards, livestock stirs lazily, cows low softly, shifting against their chains. Hens flap their wings, preparing to descend from their roosts where they spent the night. In the mud near the barns, pigs root about, raising their heads in jerks toward the house, waiting for their morning feed. All living things respond to the light. Animals, birds, and humans all obey the rhythm of nature, a rhythm untouched by time. On the road leading to the fields, the first figures appear. Peasants wrapped in woolen cloaks, with hoes and baskets slung over their shoulders. They walk slowly, steadily, as if dissolving into the cool, still landscape. Thin trails of misty breath rise above their heads in the morning chill. This is the beginning of a new day. The life of a medieval village starts not with noise or shouting, but with a slow, quiet awakening. The day has not yet brought its burdens and toil, but already the village begins to stir. Soon the sounds of hoes striking soil will echo from the fields. Cowbells will ring, children will shout. But for now, only dawn, and in that silence, the earth itself seems to breathe. Peasants wake up and prepare breakfast. Inside the peasant's home, it is still dark, even as daylight begins to break outside. Light seeps in slowly, through the narrow gaps between logs, the chimney, and slightly opened shutters. The ceiling is low, blackened with time and smoke. The walls are rough, made from crudely cut timber. The floors either earthen or covered with worn wooden boards, already warm from the breath of the night. At the center of the house is a large oven. It is the heart of the dwelling. It keeps warmth even through the night, and the side of it is used as a sleeping place for the youngest or oldest members of the family. The first to rise is usually one of the women, the mother or eldest daughter. She gets up quietly, trying not to wake the others, and by touch alone, in near total darkness, throws on a woolen shawl. The soft rustle of straw, the creak of floorboards, and the gentle footsteps blend with the morning sounds outside. Roosters calling, cattle lowing, the thudding of hooves in the pen. She approaches the oven, takes an iron poker, and carefully stirs the embers. A faint heat still lingers from the night, just enough to quickly start a new fire. Dry kindling and moss are pulled from a small chest in the corner. Within minutes, a fire crackles inside the oven, casting golden, flickering light across the room. This is the moment the whole family begins to wake. Children stir on the straw bedding, yawning, rubbing their eyes. The man of the house rises slowly, with weary movements, as though he had never truly slept. He puts on a worn linen shirt, wraps a homespun cloak over it, adjusts his belt, Every motion is habitual, automatic. On the table near the oven, food begins to appear. A clay cup with the remains of yesterday's porridge, a jug of sour milk, a wooden bowl of soaked rye bread. Breakfast is simple, almost symbolic. A thin gruel is made with water, crushed barley, and turnips. Sometimes a bit of lard is added, if they're lucky. The bread is sour, dark, and cracked, but filling. They drink kvass or plain water. Everything is prepared quickly and without fuss. The peasant routine, honed through generations, requires no wasted steps. While the meal is cooking, the man steps outside to check the animals, open the gate, and make sure nothing went wrong during the night. The air's cold, the ground is damp, and his breath turns to mist in the chilly air. In the barn, cows low loudly, hay rustles, and an impatient bull stomps its hooves. Dogs stretch and yawn, already sensing the day's work ahead. The women still inside set the table, slices of bread on wooden boards, porridge ladled into bowls. Someone heads to the well to fetch fresh water. The entire morning is filled with a quiet sense of purpose. In a corner, younger children play with rag dolls or bundles of straw, but even their games are subdued, respectful of the morning calm. The family gathers around the table. No one speaks. The silence is broken only by the sound of wooden spoons, the crackle of crusty bread, and the creak of benches. This breakfast is not for leisure. It is fuel for the day ahead. Every bite, every moment, is measured and purposeful. After eating, dishes are cleared quickly. Women wipe the table and return the leftovers to the oven. The men pull on their footwear, leather-wrapped bast shoes, or heavy boots. Over their backs, they sling bags of tools, hoes, ropes, knives. All handmade, all well used. Clothes are wrapped tighter, hair is tucked into headscarves or hoods. In their eyes, the understanding that the day will be long and hard, as always. While the adults prepare for fieldwork, older children feed the chickens, clean the yard, and gather dry twigs for firewood. Younger ones follow their mother, pulling at her skirt, silently begging for attention. But there is no time. The morning does not wait. And so, after a short and silent meal, the peasant house empties. The mistress is the last to leave. Wiping her hands on her apron, she scans the yard one last time, mentally listing what must be done before noon. Behind her, the warmth of the hearth and the quiet of sleep. Ahead, endless fields and unrelenting labor. The village elder's early inspection of the fields. While most peasants are just beginning to stir fires and lead livestock into the yard, one man in the village has long been awake. It is the elder, an old yet still strong man, with a face carved by time, hands like polished wood, and eyes that reflect the sky, the fields, and the long, unending life of the land. His day begins earlier than anyone else's, even before the roosters find their voice, and he steps outside before smoke curls from a single chimney. He wears an old but well-kept caftan, belted at the waist with worn leather. Across his back is a long staff, its darkened handle shiny from years of use. He walks without haste. His steps are deliberate, unhurried. He moves down the village's main path, observing everything. Where a fence has collapsed, where a new path was trampled overnight, where water has overflowed from a trough. The elder notices all of it, without writing anything down. The entire village lives in his memory. He remembers the dead, the temperament of every ox, and even how the bread rises in each house's oven. As the village still sleeps, he moves beyond the last house to where the fields begin. There, under a soft morning mist, stretches the true heart of peasant life, the arable land. The fields run in narrow strips, divided by boundary stones and worn-down paths. Each strip belongs to a different family, and the elder knows whose is whose. He walks along the edges, checking. Has a stone shifted? Has someone stepped over the line? Has a dispute taken root? Here, the boundary is not just a mark. It is blood, sweat, and pride. Every bit of land comes at a cost, and even a half step of injustice can cause arguments or even fists to fly. He stops at a fork between two fields and sits on a fallen log. He removes his cap, wipes his brow, and gazes into the distance, toward the rising sun. His face shows no joy or sorrow. It is calm, like stone. He sees not only the present. In his mind, he sees what this day will bring. Who will be late to the field? Who will forget to fix their fence again? Who will try to draw water from someone else's stream? At this hour, he is alone between village and forest. Birds begin to wake, filling the air with their songs. The sun slowly rises, its light piercing the morning haze and falling across the earth, and the elder watches how it touches the grain, the grass, the roots. He knows where the moisture from last night's rain still lingers, where the soil is cracking, where moles have disturbed the beds. To him, the land is not just a place, it is a living book, and he is its reader. Then he rises, takes up his staff again, and continues. He walks to the far edge of the village's holdings, where the pastures lie. Smoke is already visible there. A shepherd who slept near the herd is boiling his morning gruel. The elder greets him with a nod and passes by. He doesn't demand reports or ask questions. He sees everything for himself. He checks the fences. Have they held? Did wolves slip through in the night? Did any animal wander off? He spots fresh tracks, large, clear. A fox, no doubt. Tomorrow he'll warn the villagers, strengthen the hen houses. On the way back, he passes the fields again. Now voices can be heard. The first peasants have come out to work. He recognizes them by their gait, by their tools, by the way each one carries their hoe. He does not call out or shout. He simply watches and nods. That's enough. His respect is not something earned by loudness. It's built through years of honest labor and careful observation. At the edge of the village, a couple of barefoot children greet him, sacks slung over their shoulders. He nods again and reaches out his hand. They shyly hand him a slice of bread. He eats as he walks, briefly, without savor, just to quiet the hunger. His thoughts are still with the fields. In his mind form notes, lists, decisions. He already knows whom to remind, whom to warn, whom to punish. But not today. Today is only observation. Work begins not with orders, but with understanding. He returns to the village when smoke rises from every chimney, when women begin stepping out with buckets, when the air fills with voices. For the others, morning is just beginning. For the elder, half the village has already been walked, dozens of signs read in the earth, and decisions quietly made. Such begins the day of the one who guards the order, the land, and the rhythm of the entire community. He is not above the others, but he is the first to meet the day, side by side with the earth. The beginning of field work. The sun fully rises above the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber, honey, and milk. The morning mist slowly dissipates, leaving behind a glistening sheen on grass, soil, and roots. At this moment, village life approaches its first and most important threshold, the beginning of work in the fields. This is not just labor. It is a daily return to the central purpose of peasant life. Growing grain, feeding the family, and sustaining the very existence of the community. From the village, a procession of people moves toward the fields. Men, women, teenagers, even children, each carries what they can. Sacks of seed, wooden hoes, woven baskets, sickles tied at their belts, and clay jugs of water hastily plugged with cloth. Their clothing is simple and dark. Woolen caftans, rough linen shirts, short trousers, scarves, and hoods to guard against sun and wind. All walk in silence, saving breath, inwardly focused and collected. The fields greet them with a hush, broken only by the sounds of nature. Lark calls, the rustling of grass, the buzz of insects. But this silence does not last. As soon as the first footsteps touch the soil, the field comes alive. The rough creak of wooden plows, the dull thud of hoes into damp earth, terse commands, children's shouts helping their parents, all this gradually transforms into a living symphony of labor. Every family knows its strip of land and quickly disperses to their allotted sections. The men take on the heaviest tasks. They drag simple plows, wooden frames with iron tips, harnessed to cows or oxen. Plowing is exhausting, especially in a heavy clay soil. Hooves sink deep, wheels slip, straps groan. But no one complains. All understand the cost of bread, the weight of grain and the weight of fatigue. Behind the men come the women and older children. Their job is to break up large clods of earth, level the furrows, and ensure seeds do not fall into barren soil. Some fields have already been sown, while others are only beginning to be prepared. Where no animals are used, women bend low over the soil, sifting it with their fingers, tearing out the roots of weeds, casting seeds with well-practiced precision. Not too thick, not too sparse. Nearby, children wander about, scaring away birds, bringing water, or simply playing in the dust and stubble. Even the smallest help matters. In this world, there are no spare hands. At one end of the field, a shout rings out. Someone has found a mouse hole, and now the whole family eagerly fills it in, so pests don't reach the seeds. In another place, a fox track is spotted, a warning that the chickens are at risk, and coops must be reinforced. Fieldwork isn't just planting. It is constant observation of the world, the soil, the sky, the behavior of animals, the signs of coming rain. As the sun climbs higher, the heat intensifies. Sweat stains appear on backs, trickles down faces, stings eyes. Clothing clings to skin, but no one stops. Only occasionally does someone sit on the edge of a boundary line to take a sip of water from a jug, pass it on, and catch their breath. These short breaks feel almost sacred. No laughter, no chatter, only heavy breathing and quiet determination. By late morning, midday approaches. The women step away from the earth for a few minutes and take out flatbreads, bits of onion, salted pork fat, sometimes a little curd. They eat sitting right in the furrows, placing scarves under themselves. No one complains about the meagerness of the meal. In this world, food is not for pleasure, but for survival. Sometimes someone shares their last bite with a neighbor, not out of weakness, out of respect. Everyone knows tomorrow may be harder than today. And yet, despite the fatigue, the aching backs, the blisters, the heat, and the dust in their noses, in the air, there is a certain tension, almost joy, because with every stroke of the hoe, every meter of turned earth, every seed buried in soil, a trace is left. The labor is not in vain. It becomes bread, sustenance, life. The peasant becomes part of the cycle, a speck in the great, though heavy, harmony between nature and man. In the distance, the village elder appears again. He walks between the rows, watching, assessing. He nods approvingly to some, gives quiet remarks to others. His word carries weight, but he is not above the land. He is simply the one who knows how not to disturb its order. And so passes the first half of the day in the field, a day like hundreds before it. But every time it feels like the first, because the land, though eternal, demands new strength each day, and each day, the peasant gives that strength. Midday and the village's temporary stillness. When the sun reaches its zenith and its rays fall almost vertically, a unique state settles over the village, midday. It is not just the middle of the day. It is a boundary between two halves of the working cycle, a moment when even nature seems to pause. Shadows grow short and sharply defined. The air shimmers above the ground, and even the birds seem to fall silent, hiding in the shade of trees or beneath thatched roofs. Peasants begin to return from the fields, not all at once, but the most tired, the elderly, or mothers with young children make their way back to the village to rest, eat, and escape the scorching sun. Others remain sheltering in the shade of haystacks, sitting at the edges of boundary strips, or finding cover under wagons. A temporary stillness falls over the village, not because there is less work to do, but because even the most hard-working soul needs a moment to breathe. The streets grow quieter. Even the dogs, usually running endlessly from yard to yard, lie lazily in the dust, tongues hanging out. Cats curl into rings and doze on windowsills or in the hay. Children, worn out from running and shouting, lie in the shade of sheds, poking at the earth with sticks or lazily weaving grass crowns. Women, for a moment, remove their headscarves, rinse their faces in buckets, and hang wet cloths on gates to cool the air around the home. From some houses comes the soft clatter of wooden spoons. Someone is eating cabbage soup from the day before, porridge, grated turnips, bread with garlic. The wealthiest might have a bit of pork fat or a boiled egg. But in this hour, the main thing is not food. It is peace. Even the village elder, usually tireless in his supervision, retreats into the shade of a barn, sits on a heap of straw, and closes his eyes. It is not sleep. It is listening. He feels the village pause, the earth breathe, the wind brush against the curtains and open windows. Some women head to the well at midday. Water is the only true coolness. They draw heavy buckets, soak cloths, wipe children's faces. Sometimes they whisper to one another about the weather, about someone's illness, about the calf born at dawn. Water seems to soften their words, as if even voices should not disturb this sacred hour of calm. At this moment, the village resembles a living being that, having labored hard, takes a deep breath. No loud sounds, no shouts, no rushing. Even the birds beneath the eaves chirp softly as if subject to this quiet midday law. Somewhere in the distance, the muffled ring of a hammer. The blacksmith never rests, but even his work slows, becomes more deliberate. A light smoke rises above rooftops, from stoves where porridge simmers or milk is being warmed. The scent of herbs, smoke, and boiling food mixes into a rich aroma that fills courtyards and streets. It is a scent of home, a sign that despite poverty and hardship, everyone has a place, food, and shade from the heat. Some old men come out to sit on benches near the gates. They sit in silence, gazing into the distance. Their eyes no longer see details clearly, but they sense where a goat has slipped through the fence, where children are playing where they shouldn't, where someone is speaking too loudly. Their silent presence brings order. No one dares break the midday stillness under the gaze of an old peasant who has lived in this village longer than anyone else. Midday is not just heat. It is a time of inner quiet, when even thoughts stretch slowly, like sap under the sun. Some people pray in this hour, not loudly, not out loud, just whispering, for health, for rain, for the absence of hunger. Because at midday, when the body slows down, the soul seems to step forward, becoming more sensitive to the sky, the earth, and to other people. This brief pause doesn't last long, an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Then someone rises from a bench, ties their scarf, picks up a hoe or a rope for the yoke. They head back to the field. Another follows, then a third. The village, as if responding to an unseen signal, begins to stir again. But midday, it stays inside, like memory, like a silence you carry with you, into labor, into evening, into sleep. Return to labor in the second half of the day. The midday heat recedes slowly. The sun still hangs high in the sky, but its blaze loses its former ruthlessness. A breeze begins to stir the tops of grasses and leaves, bringing a faint but long-awaited coolness. As if in response to an unspoken signal, the village begins to awaken again. The noontime stillness fades like a shadow. The second half of the day takes over, with the same rhythm, the same intensity, but with a different breath, tired yet persistent. Peasants emerge from their courtyards, men, women, adolescents. Some tighten the belts that hold their sickles, others adjust shoulder sacks filled with seeds, others nudge a sluggish ox forward with a gentle prod. No one wastes words on small talk. Everyone already knows where to go, what needs doing, who needs help. In the fields, each person is a part of a mechanism, and that mechanism begins turning once more. Dust rises again. The barefoot tracks are imprinted on the narrow paths leading toward the sown plots, on carts, on shoulders, in hands. Everything necessary for labor: hoes, ropes, baskets, buckets. The fields greet people with the heat of sun-warmed soil, the brittle rustle of stalks, and the distant calls of crows over remote woodlands. Work in the second half of the day feels different. Morning was for plowing, preparing, sowing. Now, it's time to adjust, inspect, level, fertilize, protect. Women clear weeds from the borders between plots. Men mend fences. Children patrol the edges, chasing away birds and making sure no one crosses onto another's land. Everything remains important, still demanding strength, but movements are now steadier, more focused. There is less rush, more experience. Small groups gather at the edge of the field, someone repairing a broken tool under a mat of hay, someone sharing the last scraps of their midday meal. Sometimes a song is heard, soft, rhythmic, almost whispered, not to distract, but to provide a working rhythm. These are not songs of joy. They are old rituals, against fatigue, against loneliness, against wandering thoughts. A woman's voice sings of the earth, of the river, of a beloved gone off to war. Someone joins in. Someone listens silently, but all hear. Sometimes a short story is told about how last year, right here, oats grew waist-high, or how lightning struck a tree, and now no one dares to sleep beneath it. These tales aren't entertainment, they're roots. Through them, the peasants feel that they aren't just working, but continuing something far older and more vital than one day or one family. By the middle of the afternoon, fatigue returns. But now it is different. Not sharp like in the morning. Rather, it is dull, bone deep. Backs beg for support, legs ache, hands lose precision. Still, step by step, motion by motion, hand to earth, eyes to horizon. To stop is to leave work undone. And unfinished work means twice the burden tomorrow. Toward evening, the fields begin to change color. Gold turns to bronze, shadows stretch longer, and the wind carries scents of dry soil and distant water. Birds return to the sky. Occasionally, someone notices a flock of cranes or a gliding hawk, and even the busiest look up for a moment. These signs are reminders. Beyond labor, there is still sky, still distance, still a path, even if unreachable. Some peasants head toward far-off corners of the land to check the bees, gather hay, inspect livestock grazing in the distance. These journeys are almost pilgrimages, along paths that wind through thick grass, past hills and streams. Here, a person is alone, only with nature, with its voices and smells. And in these moments of solitude, a special feeling arises, as if the land knows you, hears you, endures you. You may be poor, you may be tired, but you are needed. As the sun begins to lean toward the horizon, the work nears its end. But no one stops abruptly. Everything winds down gradually. One finishes a row and straightens up. Another empties their last handful of seed. A third rolls up rope and gathers tools. It's a ritual of completion. Labor isn't just halted, it is released. Again, the dusty path leads back toward the village. People walk in silence with lowered heads, not in despair, but with dignity. In their eyes, exhaustion and calm. On their faces, dirt and sweat, but also a slight smile. The work is done. The land has received. Tomorrow it begins again, but today is nearly behind them. From afar, a bell rings, not a church bell, but the cowbell on a returning animal. That means it's time to go home. The village awaits. Evening life in the village. Evening descends on the village slowly, almost solemnly. It does not come suddenly. First, the sun changes its color to bronze, then long shadows stretch from every bush, well, and fence. The sound of footsteps grows softer, the air denser, filled with the scent of warm soil, smoke, and the animal yard. After the day's heat, evening feels like a blessing, gentle, enveloping, quiet. The first signs of approaching night are marked by the return of livestock. The cows move slowly, swaying from side to side, their bells ringing. They know the path, they know the rhythm. Behind them come the herders, boys and old men, barefoot, sun-darkened, with long sticks and rope belts. Some children doze as they walk, worn out by the sun and running. One carries a limping lamb over his shoulder. Another drives a stubborn goat forward. The homesteads greet the return of the animals with a special hum. Someone calls their cow by name. Someone scolds. Someone sings. All living things are heading home. The yards become busy again, with a different kind of work. No less important than in the fields. The animals must be milked, fed, cleaned, locked up. The cows are led to the barns, the gates secured, warm water offered, hay thrown into troughs. Chickens are herded into coops, rabbits into cages. Behind the wooden walls, you can hear a bucket clatter, someone shouting, "Bring the light," because it's already dim in the barn. Full night hasn't yet fallen, but evening deepens the corners of the yard into cavernous shadows. Women carry buckets of milk, baskets of eggs, and pails of water into the house. Girls shake the dust from their clothes and help the older women. The youngest ones are already asleep, curled up on benches. In someone's arms is a baby that smells of milk and smoke. Inside the house, the stove begins to crackle. The fire is lit, a cauldron set to boil. In the evening, porridge or cabbage soup is cooked again. Water is heated for washing. Bread is dried. The kitchen becomes the center of the village home, especially in the evening. It warms not just the body, but the air, the atmosphere, and the sense of the day drawing to a close. On a bench in the yard, an old man sits. He hardly moves, just follows the sun's last rays with his eyes. Behind him is a lifetime. Wars, famines, fires, the birth of grandchildren. He no longer works, but his silence stands like a wall. As long as he sits at the gate, the village feels in order. No one asks him questions, but everyone feels his presence. The youth gather near the road or by the well. After a long day of work, they still want movement, but a different kind, light and lively. The girls stand with jugs, laugh, braid flower crowns. The boys straighten their shirts, tell jokes, exchange glances. One whistles, another hums a tune. Sometimes someone brings a pipe or reed flute. A quiet, simple melody begins, and feet start to dance without thinking. This is not celebration for its own sake, but a breath of freedom. There is no obligation here, no command. Only the summer evening, youth, and the feeling that life is still ahead, even in this poor, dusty village. Inside the homes, the elders gather at the table. They eat slowly, silently, almost ceremonially. Supper is not just a meal. It is the close of day, a moment of gratitude. On the table, simple food, porridge, bread, milk, sometimes soup or a bit of lard. But in the evening, this food becomes especially precious. Every bite is the result of labor, every sip, a reward. After supper, a short prayer. Someone whispers by the icon, someone crosses themselves at the doorway, someone simply pauses for a moment. The evening prayer is not public or performed. It is a quiet conversation between the person and the land, between the tired body and the one who gives tomorrow. When the sun finally dips below the horizon, a special silence settles over the village. It doesn't frighten, it embraces. It's not an emptiness, but a fullness. Everyone has something to do. Someone bathes the children, someone grooms the horse, someone whispers a bedtime tale. Dogs settle near the gates, cats slink along the fences, and the first star sparkles in the sky. And then, night. Slow, warm, starry. Not like in the city, where there's noise and light. Here, only the village is breathing, the cry of an owl, a rare bark, and the coughing of someone in their sleep. People sleep not with worry, but with the heaviness of fatigue, deep, dark, peaceful. Their day was hard, but not wasted. The earth accepted their work. The animals returned. There is bread. The hearth is warm. Tomorrow it all begins again. And the village, living, ancient, tired, falls asleep with the sky. Night, silence, and fears of the medieval world. With the arrival of complete darkness, the village seemed to vanish from the face of the earth. No roofs, no paths, no fences were visible anymore. Everything dissolved into thick black night. Only a few windows continued to glow faintly, like stars on the ground. Only the dogs guarding the homesteads occasionally gave a bark when something disturbed their ears. Everything else remained silent. And in that silence, what was hidden by daylight came to everyone. Fear. The medieval night was not merely a time for rest. It was a border between the known and the unknown, between the world of the living and what lurked beyond the light. People believed that with the night came forces absent in the day. Witches would come out, spirits would roam, and the souls of the dead who had found no peace wandered restlessly. The forest, which by day seemed merely thick and dangerous, became by night a gateway to another realm. Even the bravest did not venture beyond the edge of the village without necessity. Even within their own homes, people did not feel completely safe. Doors were bolted, shutters closed, fire dimmed slowly, accompanied by a whispered prayer. People murmured protective words, crossed themselves before icons, placed consecrated herbs under their pillows. The fire in the hearth was kept burning until morning, not only for warmth, but as a defense against evil. Even the ashes from the oven were considered sacred at night. They might be scattered across the threshold to prevent a witch from crossing it. Full moon nights were feared most of all. If the moon was bright and cast too much light, it was considered a bad omen. It was easy to lose one's way in one's own yard, to hear footsteps that weren't there, to see shadows moving without cause. On such nights, people often told of ghostly sightings, mysterious knocking within walls, cows bellowing suddenly in the dark, and by morning, one might be found dead. There were also more tangible fears, not only mythical ones. Bandits, thieves, escaped criminals could sneak into the village under cover of darkness. That's why there was always a designated night watchman. He would walk the village, tapping a stick or a rattle, so people knew he was nearby. If he fell silent, it was a signal of danger. There were cases when fires were set, livestock stolen, or even murders committed during the night. Night was not simply darkness. It was a time when law and order weakened. Yet the fear of night also gave rise to protective rituals. Special night prayers were whispered before bed. Amulets were placed in windows, chalk crosses drawn on doors. People prayed to St. Nicholas, considered a protector from nighttime misfortunes. Stones were placed at the house's corners. Guard stones meant to ward off evil. Even children knew certain words to speak if something rustled outside. But despite all fear, night was also a time of deep thought. When everything quieted, when even the dogs slept, a person was left alone with their own mind. Some lay on benches, staring at the ceiling, reflecting on the day that had passed. Some remembered the dead. Some prayed for their children's health. Night offered a silence in which one could hear their own heart. Sometimes someone did leave the house at night. For instance, if a woman was in labor, the midwife would be called. Or if someone was dying, a messenger would go to the priest. These nighttime journeys were rare, but deeply frightening. One walked with a lantern, and each step felt like eternity. Tree shadows moved like living things. The wind sounded like a voice, and everything inside tightened with that ancient fear of the dark. And yet, every morning came. And that fact alone gave people hope. No matter how dark the night, no matter how dreadful the dreams, the sun returned, and with it, shadows disappeared, fears faded, and the village awakened. People gave thanks not only for the warmth of daylight, but for the return of peace, clarity, and life itself. Village crafts and skills. Life in a medieval village was not limited to farming and tending animals. Within each home, behind every fence, existed a unique world of craft, practical, ancestral, and meticulous. These skills were an inseparable part of everyday life, passed down through generations, and often determined whether a family could survive a difficult season. Men, aside from working the fields, practiced blacksmithing, carpentry, and cooperage. There was always someone in the village who could forge a horseshoe, straighten a sickle, repair a lock, or craft a simple latch mechanism for the gate. Even a primitive forge became the heart of village technology. The clang of the hammer, the ring of metal, the heat of the fire, all were signs of power and mastery. Work was always in demand, and the blacksmith was not just a craftsman, but a respected figure, sometimes even seen as close to magical, for he tamed fire and metal. Carpenters built not only houses, but also wagons, wells, animal pens, and mill mechanisms. They worked with axes, chisels, and gouges. They knew how to select wood by age, how to listen to its grain, understanding how a log would behave in heat, rain, or frost. A carpenter's mistake could cost lives in winter, when cracks in walls let in the deadly cold. Women were responsible for spinning, weaving, sewing, soap making, and candle production. Every peasant woman knew how to work a spinning wheel, turning flax or sheep's wool into thread, and then weaving that thread into fabric. A loom stood in nearly every home. It wasn't just a tool. It was a domestic factory, whose rhythmic clatter defined the evenings. From this cloth, they made shirts, pants, towels, even sacks. All clothing was handmade, not out of luxury, but necessity. Shoemaking was considered a particular skill. In villages, shoes were made from leather or birch bark. Men tanned hides. Women stitched shoes with tough thread. Birch bark shoes, lapti, wore out quickly and had to be replaced often. But everyone knew how to make them. It was a skill built into daily life. No trip to the forest or field happened without them. Then there were the herbalists, people who knew the power of plants. Usually older women, they treated colds, wounds, stomach troubles, and even emotional distress. They knew where St. John's wort grew, when to gather mint, how to dry wormwood, what to brew with thyme. Some were considered wise women or seers, but the village respected them. Without them, there would be no salve, no infusion, no cure for pain. Some crafts were tied to celebrations: wood carving, wreath weaving, spindle painting, and towel embroidery. These activities didn't bring food, but they brought rest to the soul. They made the village not only functional, but beautiful. Especially valued were artisans who could carve icons or make wooden crosses. Their work was considered sacred. It's important to understand that in a medieval village, there was no distinction between profession and life. skills were part of one's being. Everyone knew something that helped others, and everyone depended on others' labor. This created a fabric of interdependence, of shared effort and shared world. A person without any craft was not merely poor, they were seen as useless, empty. Thus, the village survived not only on bread, but on hands, calloused, strong, and patient. Crafts were not hobbies, they were the foundation of survival, a source of pride and a thread connecting generations. Even in the darkest times, famine, drought, plague, it was these long-practiced skills that helped people endure and keep living. Sounds and music of village life. In the medieval village, sounds were an inseparable part of everyday life. They accompanied every action, set the rhythm of life, and became a kind of language of communication without words. In the morning, villagers awoke to the ringing of bells, which called them to prayer and work. Everyone could hear it, from the elderly to children, from peasants to the priest. The sound of the blacksmith's hammer striking the anvil echoed throughout the village, reminding everyone of the need for labor and creation. It symbolized strength and the unstoppable passage of time, with each strike marking a step toward a new day and a new task. Sometimes the instrument's sounds resembled a song, rhythmic, persistent, and full of confidence. On the streets, the pounding of horses' hooves, the creak of carts, and the jingling of bells on harnesses could be heard. These sounds created a lively, dynamic atmosphere where every moment was filled with work and movement. The voices of merchants, children's laughter, and barking dogs all blended into the village's soundscape, which was alive and rich. Music held special significance in the village. It accompanied festivals, rituals, work, and rest. Simple instruments were often used: wooden or bone flutes, small drums, bagpipes, and gusli, a string instrument. Musicians could be simple peasants or invited performers. They sang folk songs about love, war, nature, and labor. During celebrations, music enlivened people, making them dance and rejoice. Dancing was part of social life, helping strengthen bonds among villagers and creating a mood of unity. Songs transmitted legends, ancestral stories, and important events. Musical creativity was a way to preserve memory and culture. The sounds of nature were also part of the acoustic landscape. Birds singing, the rustling of forests, and the splash of water in streams. These created a backdrop on which life unfolded and helped people feel connected to the world around them. Night brought its own sounds: rustling leaves, the howling of wind, and sometimes wolves' howls. All these were woven into the fabric of village life, forming a unique sound world. Thus, sounds and music were an inseparable part of the medieval village, accompanying all stages of life, aiding communication, creating mood, and preserving traditions. In every sound, life was heard, and in this music, the voice of the village's very heart could be felt. Festivals and rituals in the village festivals and rituals held an important place in the life of the medieval village. They were not only occasions for rest, but also played a role in social and religious bonds among the villagers, strengthening the sense of community and maintaining a connection with higher powers and nature. The main festivals were religious, connected to the church calendar. The most important was Easter, a time of resurrection and renewal of life. Preparations began in advance: cleaning homes, sewing clothes, baking special bread called kulij. On Easter night, the entire village gathered at the church or square for services, singing, and communal prayers. Afterwards came feasts, dancing, and games. Easter symbolized the victory of life over death and gave hope for a good harvest. Equally significant were Christmas, Trinity Sunday, and the days of the village's and family's patron saints. Each such festival was accompanied by rituals that might include blessing the fields, processions, and blessing the domestic animals. These acts had both spiritual and practical significance. Villagers believed they would protect themselves from misfortune, illness, and crop failure. Besides religious celebrations, there were folk rituals connected with seasonal changes. In spring, festivities welcomed the awakening of nature with games, songs, and bonfires. Summer brought harvest festivals, when the entire village gathered to mark the end of the hard labor of gathering crops. In autumn, memorial days and commemorations for the deceased were held. Each ritual had its attributes: wreaths made of herbs and flowers, ritual dishes, special clothing, symbols of fertility. People believed these elements helped establish a connection with the forces of nature and the spirits of ancestors. The dances and songs accompanying the festivals carried deep meaning and helped pass traditions to new generations. Particular importance was attached to weddings and funerals, transitional rituals linked to birth and death. A village wedding was a communal event, a celebration not only for the newlyweds but for the entire community. It was accompanied by numerous traditions, from matchmaking and blessing ceremonies to feasts and games. Funerals were a time of grief but also unity. All villagers gathered to honor the deceased, conduct funeral rites, and accompany the departed to the grave. Often, rituals included memorial meals and stories about the life of the deceased, which helped preserve memory and maintain ties between generations. Thus, festivals and rituals were essential elements of village life. They helped not only to relax and rest, but also to strengthen social bonds, sustain faith, transmit traditions, and connect people with the surrounding world. The role of family and kinship in the village. In the medieval village, the family was the fundamental social and economic unit of society. Family relationships were built on mutual support, responsibility, and traditions passed down from generation to generation. Large families often lived together in one house or a cluster of nearby houses, united by common life and household. Kinship meant not only blood ties, but also a broad network of duties and rights. Relatives supported each other in difficult times, in sickness, poverty, or when sharing hard labor. Marriages were often contracted within the community to keep property and connections within the village. The head of the family was usually the man, the father or eldest relative, who made important decisions and was responsible for the household's welfare. However, the woman's role was no less significant. She managed the home, raised children, cared for livestock, and prepared food. Men's and women's work complemented each other, creating the foundation for survival. Children from an early age were involved in labor, helping in the fields, tending animals, learning crafts. Education was mainly practical, knowledge and skills passed down from parents and elders. The family was a school of life, where everyone learned not only how to work, but also to follow rules, respect elders, and support others. Besides the immediate family, extended relatives, cousins, uncles, aunts were important. They participated in each other's lives, helped when needed, and took part in communal affairs. Kinship ties strengthened social stability, created a support network, and ensured survival amid harsh natural and social challenges. Thus, family and kinship in the medieval village were the center of life, economic, social, and cultural. They united people, provided protection, and helped overcome difficulties, preserving traditions and connections between generations. Lifestyle and daily routine in the medieval village. Life in the medieval village was strictly regulated by natural conditions, the seasons, and the necessity of survival. Each morning began early, long before sunrise. People rose with the first crowing of roosters to make the most of daylight hours, as artificial lighting was scarce and expensive. The first task for peasants was to go out to the fields or gardens to till the soil, sow seeds, weed out unwanted plants, or harvest crops. The work was hard and monotonous, requiring patience and strength. Depending on the season and climate, the schedule changed. In spring, preparing the soil and sowing. In summer, tending plants and gathering fruits. In autumn, harvesting and storing crops. In winter, repairing tools, caring for livestock, and preparing for the new season. Women began their day with household chores, cooking food, spinning and weaving fabrics, caring for children and domestic animals. Their work was no less important, though often unnoticed. Without them, village life would be impossible. Besides labor, women were responsible for raising the young, passing down knowledge and traditions. Lunch breaks were short and often consisted of simple meals: bread, soup, or porridge. People rarely could afford long breaks. Every minute was precious. In the afternoon, work resumed, usually in the fields or craft workshops. Children helped the elders, learned trades, and performed manageable tasks. Evenings were times for rest and socializing. After hard labor, people gathered by the hearth, shared news, told stories, or sang songs. Sometimes, communal activities took place: handiwork, games, or preparations for festivals. Despite fatigue, villagers tried to maintain a spirit of community and joy. The daily routine was inseparable from the church calendar and traditions. Holidays and Sunday services added variety and allowed a temporary break from monotonous labor. Religious rites reminded villagers of higher purposes and sustained morale. Winter life was quieter, but no less intense. Low temperatures and short daylight limited fieldwork, so more attention was paid to indoor tasks: repairing homes, making clothes and tools, and caring for livestock. Winter evenings were long, and people devoted more time to education and spending time together. Thus, the lifestyle and daily routine in the medieval village were closely connected to nature, labor, and traditions. Every day was filled with meaning and duties that ensured survival and community development. Villagers lived in harmony with the world around them, supported each other, and preserved cultural heritage to pass it on to future generations. Occupations and crafts in the village. In the medieval village, crafts and economic activities formed the foundation of life and the economy. Most inhabitants engaged in agriculture, but alongside this, there were other professions that ensured the community's livelihood and contributed to its development. The primary occupation was farming, tilling the land, sowing, and harvesting crops. This required knowledge of the soil, weather, crop rotation, and proper agricultural techniques. The land was divided into plots worked on collectively, allowing for efficient use of resources and ensuring sustenance. Crafts included blacksmithing, pottery, weaving, shoemaking, and the making of tools and household items. The blacksmith played an important role, forging plows, shoeing horses, crafting weapons, and making household utensils. His workshop was a center of village life, where people sought help and advice. Weavers and spinners produced fabrics for clothing and household textiles. They used wool, flax, and hemp. Craftsmen passed their skills down through generations, maintaining high levels of mastery and unique techniques. Potters made clay vessels, pots, bowls, pitchers, essential for storing and preparing food. These items were durable and simple, but also had aesthetic value, decorated with ornaments and patterns. Shoemakers crafted leather footwear that protected feet in the fields and everyday life. Leather was also used for belts, bags, and other goods. Additionally, there were herbalists and healers, specialists who treated illnesses and prepared medicinal concoctions from herbs. Their knowledge was crucial for maintaining villagers' health, especially given limited access to doctors. Crafts and economic activities were closely intertwined with rural life. People often combined several trades. For example, a farmer could also be a blacksmith or carpenter. This created a self-sufficient economy and reduced dependence on outside sources. Training in crafts occurred through practice and the passing of experience from elders to youth. Young people started with simple tasks and gradually mastered more complex skills. In some cases, workshops existed where craftsmen worked together, supporting and advancing their shared craft. Thus, crafts and economic activities were integral parts of village life. They ensured survival, development, and stability of the community, helped preserve cultural heritage, and maintained economic independence. Education and knowledge in the medieval village. In the medieval village, Education and the transmission of knowledge had a specific character, different from urban schools and monastic institutions. Education in the village was primarily practical, closely tied to daily life, crafts, and agriculture. Formal schooling, as we understand it today, was virtually non-existent. However, knowledge, skills, and traditions were passed down orally and through practice from generation to generation. From an early age, children were involved in labor and learned by observing and imitating adults. They helped their parents in the fields, household, and workshops, absorbing knowledge about working the land, caring for animals, handling tools and crafts. This was the foundation of their education, learning through work and experience. The main source of knowledge and cultural values for villagers was the older generation, parents, grandparents, mentors, and elders. They told stories, legends, folk tales, passed down moral norms, religious rituals, and rules of community life. These oral traditions were an important part of education, shaping worldview and strengthening communal bonds. Moreover, the church played a significant role in spreading basic knowledge. In some villages, schools attached to the church existed, where children learned reading, writing, and the fundamentals of faith. These lessons were mainly conducted in Latin, the language of worship and literacy. Access to such schools was limited and usually available to sons of craftsmen, prosperous peasants, or minor landowners. Learning crafts and professions was also a vital part of knowledge. Skills were passed down within family or communal traditions, involving experienced craftsmen. Often, training began as an apprentice or helper, gradually mastering complex skills and eventually becoming a master. This process lasted many years and required patience and perseverance. Besides practical training, religious culture held a significant place. Religious holidays, rituals, prayer reading, and church attendance contributed to spiritual development and moral upbringing. For many villagers, faith was an integral part of life and the basis for understanding the world. Thus, education and knowledge in the medieval village were organically connected with life and labor. They were transmitted orally and through experience, forming the foundation of culture, morality, and professional preparation. Despite the lack of formal schools, villagers possessed deep practical knowledge that enabled them to survive, work, and preserve traditions. Festivals and rituals in the medieval village. Festivals and rituals held an important place in the life of the medieval village, serving not only religious purposes, but also strengthening social cohesion, transmitting cultural traditions, and providing emotional relief amid hard labor. These events united the villagers, helped maintain morale, and preserved connections with natural cycles and spiritual values. The main source of festivals was the church. Religious holidays dedicated to saints and major events of Christian history were filled with rituals, prayers, sermons, and communal celebrations. Easter, Christmas, Pentecost, Assumption, and many other days were observed with special solemnity. During such festivals, services, processions, hymn singing, and church plays took place, involving all inhabitants. In addition to church holidays, there were folk festivals rooted in pre-Christian times and connected to natural phenomena, seasonal changes, and agricultural cycles. Maslenitsa, Butter Week, Kupala Night, Ivan Kupala Day, and other festivals featured fertility rites, cleansing ceremonies, fortune-telling, and songs. These expressed hopes for a good harvest, health, and prosperity. Festivals were accompanied by various rituals. For example, during Maslenitsa, people burned effigies of winter, rode sleighs, sang songs, and danced. On Kupala night, bonfires were lit, and people jumped over the flames to cleanse themselves of evil spirits. Such rituals symbolized renewal and a connection with nature. During festivals, communal feasts were held, serving traditional dishes often made from homegrown produce. Food and drink symbolized abundance and joy. Festive days provided a chance to rest from daily worries. gather together, exchange news, and strengthen friendly and familial ties. Weddings, baptisms, funerals, and other life ceremonies also played a key role in community life. They involved special rituals, songs, dances, and traditions passed down through generations. These events emphasized the importance of family, community, and spiritual bonds. Festivals were times of leisure, entertainment, and creativity. People organized folk games, contests, singing, and music. Craftsmen demonstrated their skills, and youth participated in competitions and games, promoting unity and preserving cultural heritage. Thus, festivals and rituals in the medieval village fulfilled many functions: religious, social, cultural, and psychological. They helped villagers cope with hardships, maintain hope and faith, support community, and pass traditions to future generations. The role of family and kinship in the medieval village. In the medieval village, the family and kinship played a central role in all aspects of life. It was not just a unit of society, but the foundation of economic survival, social stability, and cultural heritage. Bonds within the family and kinship determined the distribution of labor, rights, and responsibilities, and provided support and protection to each of its members. The family in the village was usually extended, including not only parents and children, but also grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins. Such a union allowed for the efficient distribution of duties, collective decision-making in household tasks, and care for both the young and elderly members. Kinship ties were significant for determining rights to land, property, and resources. Land allotments were often inherited within the kinship group, ensuring continuity of economic activities and community stability. Land disputes were resolved considering kinship traditions and customs that regulated ownership and use. Family relationships were built on mutual responsibility and support. Men and women had their roles that complemented each other. Men typically performed heavy physical labor, plowing, construction, hunting, while women managed domestic chores, cared for children, prepared food, and made clothing. Together, they created a solid foundation for the family's survival. Marriage was seen not only as a union of two individuals, but also as the joining of two kinship groups. This was important for strengthening social ties and expanding the support network. Wedding ceremonies involved numerous traditions and rituals, emphasizing the family's importance in the community. Children held a significant place in family and community life. Their upbringing and education were a shared responsibility involving parents, elders, and neighbors. From an early age, children were taught work and crafts, preparing them for adult life and continuing the kinship line. The family also played a key role in the village's religious life. Through family ceremonies, baptisms, funerals, festivals, spiritual values were transmitted and moral principles were reinforced. Often, the family was the bearer of traditions and customs, preserving the community's cultural identity. Thus, the family and kinship in the medieval village were the center of life and the basis of social organization. They ensured survival, support, transmission of knowledge and cultural values, formed stable bonds, and helped people cope with the hardships of the time. Power and governance in the medieval village. Power and governance in the medieval village were an integral part of the social structure and reflected the relationships between the feudal lord, local inhabitants, and the church. The organization of authority was multi-layered and built on a system of obligations, mutual rights, and duties, which helped maintain order, regulate economic activity, and protect the community. At the head of the village often stood a village elder or community leader, a person chosen or appointed to manage daily affairs, resolve disputes, and represent the village's interests before the lord or feudal master. The elder needed to have authority, knowledge of local customs, and the ability to maintain order. They collected taxes, supervised the fulfillment of duties, and ensured compliance with laws and regulations. The feudal lord, owning the land and resources, held supreme power and the right to collect tributes and obligations from the peasants. His authority was based on feudal relations, where peasants were obliged to work the lord's land, give part of their harvest, and participate in construction and defense of the castle. In return, the lord provided protection and patronage. These relations were governed by agreements and traditions enshrined in local customs and laws. The church also played a significant role in village governance. The local priest not only performed religious rites, but influenced the moral behavior of villagers, participated in dispute resolution, kept chronicles and documentation. Church laws often supplemented secular norms and served as the basis for many rules and prohibitions. Various forms of collective self-governance existed in the village. For example, assemblies or general meetings of villagers were held to discuss important issues: land distribution, organization of work, punishment for offenses, planning festivals, and rituals. Such participation helped maintain a sense of responsibility and belonging to the community. To maintain order, guards or watchmen worked in the village, overseeing security and law enforcement, especially at night. They warned of possible dangers such as robber attacks, fires, or other emergencies. Law and punishment in the village were based on customary law, a body of traditions and rules passed down orally. For breaking the norms, various measures could be applied: fines, corporal punishment, expulsion from the community. The main goal of punishments was to restore justice and maintain peace. Thus, power and governance in the medieval village represented a complex system of interaction between various institutions and levels, aimed at ensuring stability, order, and community development. Despite the limitations of formal legislation, it was through traditions, customs, and collective participation that villagers preserved harmony and built a stable social structure. The economy of the medieval village was based on agricultural production and closely connected to natural conditions, social structures, and feudal obligations. Village life revolved around the household economy, where the main source of livelihood was farming, animal husbandry, and crafts. Understanding this economic system helps to see how the medieval community functioned, how resources and labor were distributed, and how the village ensured survival and development. Land was the main resource around which all economic activity was built. Most of it belonged to the feudal lord or the church, while peasants received plots to cultivate in exchange for tribute and services. The size of the plot depended on social status and agreements with the lord. Farmers aimed to use the land as efficiently as possible, applying crop rotation, grazing, and other methods known at the time. Agriculture was diverse and included growing cereals, wheat, barley, oats, vegetables, fruits, as well as raising domestic animals: cows, sheep, pigs, and poultry. Animal husbandry provided the village with meat, milk, wool, and leather, which were important parts of the economy and daily life. Crafts played an important role in the village economy. Many peasants combined farming with skills in making various items: clothes, tools, pottery, shoes. In some villages, there were craft workshops where blacksmiths, potters, weavers, and carpenters worked. These crafts not only met internal needs, but sometimes supplied trade with neighboring settlements. Exchange and trade in the village occurred mainly at local markets and fairs. Surpluses were sold or exchanged for needed goods and tools. Trade was limited due to transportation difficulties and lack of developed infrastructure, but it contributed to expanding economic connections and enriching the community. Feudal obligations, a mandatory part of the economic system, required peasants not only to pay part of their harvest, but also to perform labor on the lord's land, build roads, castles, and other public facilities. These duties were a heavy burden, but simultaneously ensured certain protection and support from the feudal lord. An important element of the economy was self-sufficiency. Most products and goods were made within the village or nearby surroundings, minimizing dependence on external sources. This required a high level of skill and knowledge from the inhabitants, as well as close cooperation among neighbors. Financial transactions were often conducted in kind, with products, labor, or services. Money was used less frequently and was mainly available at markets or in trade with towns. This system of exchange reflected a limited level of economic development and complicated wealth accumulation. Despite difficulties, the economy of the medieval village was quite stable, ensuring the population's survival and supporting the social structure. Its successful functioning depended on the community's ability to cooperate, distribute resources, and adapt to natural and social conditions. Social relations in the medieval village represented a complex hierarchical system in which different layers of the population interacted, each with its own rights, duties, and status. This system was an integral part of feudal society and determined the order of life, distribution of resources, and interactions between people. At the top of the social structure of the village stood the feudal lord, the landowner who controlled significant territories and possessed political and economic power. His influence extended over all village inhabitants, who were obligated to perform duties, pay taxes, and participate in labor on the lord's land. The feudal lord provided protection to his subjects, represented their interests at higher levels, and managed judicial matters. Below the feudal lord were various categories of peasants, among whom free farmers and dependent peasants were distinguished. Free peasants had certain rights to the land and could manage their farms independently, although they paid tribute or rent to the lord. Dependent peasants or serfs were under the lord's control and were obliged to work on his land as well as fulfill other feudal duties. In addition to peasants, craftsmen could also live in the village, engaged in making various goods and tools. Although craftsmen did not always have the status of peasants, they were an important part of the economic life and social structure, supporting the household and providing the community with necessary products. Clergy and monks also played a significant role, not only performing religious services, but influencing the moral behavior of residents, education, and support for those in need. The church owned substantial land and influence, making it one of the key social institutions in the village. Social relations in the village were built on principles of mutual dependence and responsibility. Each community member had their duties and rights, and the stability and welfare of all depended on their fulfillment. Violation of established norms could lead to punishments ranging from fines to expulsion. Women in the village held a special position. They participated in economic activities, raised children, and maintained the family hearth. But their rights were limited compared to men. Despite this, women often played a key role in preserving traditions and maintaining social cohesion. Social distinctions were also manifested in customs, clothing, lifestyle, and even modes of communication. These differences emphasized a person's status and position in the community and helped maintain order. Thus, social relations and classes in the medieval village were a complex and multifaceted system, reflecting the features of feudal society and ensuring the functioning of the community. Understanding these relations helps to gain a deeper insight into the life and structure of medieval rural society. Religious life and the influence of the church in the medieval village religious life was a central element of daily existence in the medieval village, exerting a profound influence on the worldview, culture, and social relations of its inhabitants. The church not only fulfilled a spiritual function, but was also an important social and cultural institution that shaped moral norms, united the community, and regulated many aspects of life. Church services and religious rituals took place in the local church or chapel located at the center of the village, serving not only as a place of worship but also as a community hub. Attending Mass, celebrating religious holidays, and participating in church processions united the villagers, creating a sense of unity and belonging to a shared faith. The priest was a key figure in the village. He performed baptisms, weddings, and funerals, taught children the basics of faith and morality, acted as a mediator in conflict resolution, and upheld moral order. His words and guidance carried great weight, and villagers strove to follow church rules. The church owned significant landholdings, making it one of the largest landowners in the village. Income from these lands was used to maintain the clergy, build churches, and conduct charitable activities. At the same time, church taxes and dues were also imposed on peasants, which sometimes caused dissatisfaction, but was accepted as an inevitable part of life. Religious holidays and fasting periods were important elements of the village calendar. They alternated times of labor and rest, filling everyday life with meaning and symbolism. During such events, fairs, folk celebrations, and collective work took place, strengthening social bonds and preserving traditions. Monasteries located near villages also played an important role. They were centers of education, crafts, and medical care. Monks copied books, treated the sick, and maintained agriculture, spreading knowledge and culture within the rural environment. Canon law supplemented secular laws by regulating matters of marriage, inheritance, and behavior. Violations of church norms could result in spiritual penalties such as excommunication, which at the time was considered a serious punishment, and social ostracism. Thus, religious life and the influence of the church in the medieval village were deeply intertwined with daily life, shaping the spiritual and cultural character of the community, maintaining moral order and social cohesion. It is difficult to imagine the structure and dynamics of medieval rural life without the involvement of the church. Education and culture in the medieval village were an integral part of life, although their level and forms differed significantly from modern conceptions. With limited access to literacy and formal education, the primary sources of knowledge and cultural experience were traditions, oral folk art, and church education. Most village inhabitants were illiterate, and learning to read and write was available only to a few, mainly priests and some craftsmen. The role of schools in the village was minimal. In small parish schools attached to the church, children from clerical families and wealthier peasants received education. The education provided was primarily religious, based on studying prayers, biblical texts, and church rules. Oral folk art played a key role in preserving and transmitting knowledge, values, and cultural traditions. Tales, songs, proverbs, and legends were passed down from generation to generation, helping to shape worldview and moral guidelines. These cultural forms united the community, maintained a connection to the past, and provided answers to life's questions. Craftsmanship and traditional knowledge were transmitted through apprenticeship under masters, often within the family circle. This allowed for the preservation and development of skills necessary for economic activity and everyday life. Participation in festivals, rituals, in communal events accompanied by music, dances, and theatrical performances was also an important part of cultural experience. The church was the main guardian of written culture and educational traditions. Monasteries and parish churches engaged in copying books, maintaining chronicles, and educating youth. Religious texts, as well as works of philosophers and theologians, formed the basis of intellectual life, although they remained inaccessible to most villagers. The culture of the medieval village was closely connected to nature and the agricultural cycle. Harvest festivals, spring and winter rituals reflected respect for the land and seasonal changes, which found expression in songs, dances, and ceremonies. This connection with nature and the life cycle supported harmony and community stability. Thus, despite limited opportunities, education and culture in the medieval village were vibrant and diverse phenomena that shaped a unique way of life, contributed to knowledge transmission, and strengthened social ties. Understanding these aspects helps to gain deeper insight into the daily life and spiritual world of medieval rural society. The role of women in the medieval village. Women in the medieval village held an important and multifaceted position in the social, economic, and family life. Their labor and responsibilities were an integral part of everyday existence within the community, although officially their role was often underestimated and limited by patriarchal norms. Within the household, women performed a wide range of tasks, from childcare and cooking to producing textiles, spinning, and weaving. Weaving was one of the most common crafts among women. By making linen and woolen fabrics, they provided the family with clothing and household textiles. These skills were passed down from generation to generation and were often supplemented by selling surplus goods at markets. Moreover, women actively participated in agricultural work, planting and harvesting crops, caring for livestock, gathering berries and herbs, making them indispensable helpers in securing the family's sustenance. Their involvement in field work was especially crucial during periods of intense labor, such as harvest time and preparations for winter. Women also played a key role in preserving cultural and religious traditions. They taught children the basics of faith, customs, and ethics, conducted domestic rituals, and monitored adherence to traditional behavioral norms. In village communities, women often became keepers of family history and oral folk art. A woman's social status depended on her position within the family and community. Married women had certain rights and duties related to managing the household and raising children, but were under the authority of their husbands and elder men. Unmarried women and widows could manage households independently and sometimes engaged in crafts or trade, granting them a degree of economic independence. However, women's rights were limited by law and church regulations. For example, they rarely owned land or participated in public village affairs. Their role was often reduced to supporting the family and performing domestic duties, reflecting the generally accepted patriarchal order of society. Nevertheless, women could occupy more active roles. Some became healers, midwives, or herbalists, possessing knowledge of herbs and medicine. These skills made them important figures in village life, especially during times of illness and childbirth. Thus, the role of women in the medieval village was complex and multifaceted, encompassing labor, family responsibilities, and cultural and religious upbringing. Despite limitations, women made a significant contribution to the survival and development of the rural community, shaping its spiritual and economic foundation. Public structures and governance in the medieval village. The medieval village represented a complex social and administrative system in which various levels of authority and public institutions interacted. Governance and organization of village life were based on a combination of feudal rights, rural community traditions, and ecclesiastical influence. The main governing body was the rural community, a collective of residents who jointly owned and used land, resolved economic and social issues. The community ensured the distribution of plots, organized collective labor, and controlled adherence to shared norms and rules. Decisions within the community were made during assemblies or meetings attended by elders and family representatives. An important role in governance was played by the elder, a village head elected or appointed, responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and liaising with the feudal lord or local authorities. The elder acted as an intermediary between peasants and the lord, supervised the fulfillment of duties, and participated in conflict resolution. His authority was based on trust and community support. The feudal lord, the landowner, held legal and economic rights over the village lands and resources. He had supreme power over the peasants, could appoint officials, set taxes and obligations, and judge law violations. Despite this, the Lord rarely interfered in daily affairs, entrusting governance to the community and the elder. Ecclesiastical structures also played a significant role in village life and governance. The parish church was not only a religious center, but also a place where moral and partially legal matters were addressed. The priest often participated in community assemblies, acting as an arbiter in disputes and a mentor in moral issues. Laws and customs regulating village life were a complex mix of feudal law, church prescriptions, and local traditions. Violations were punished by fines, exile, or even corporal punishment, which maintained order and discipline in society. Additionally, informal public institutions existed, brotherhoods, mutual aid groups, ancient peasant unions that provided support in difficult times, joint labor, and protection of common interests. These institutions strengthened social bonds and reduced conflicts. Thus, governance in the medieval village was based on the interaction of the community, the lord, and the church, maintaining social order and ensuring the stability of rural life. Understanding these structures helps gain deeper insight into the mechanisms of medieval society and the role of its participants in its development. Food and agriculture in the medieval village. The diet of medieval village inhabitants was closely linked to the characteristics of agriculture, climatic conditions, and the social status of peasants. The foundation of their diet consisted of simple and accessible products grown or gathered on their own land, as well as animal products and seasonal gifts of nature. The main crop in most regions was grain bread, made from rye, wheat, or barley. Bread was not only food, but also an important cultural element and a symbol of life. For poor peasants, bread was often coarse with impurities, while for the wealthy, it was white and fine. Besides bread, their diet included porridge, soups, and flatbreads made from various cereals. Vegetables played an important role in their diet. Cabbage, onions, garlic, turnips, carrots, beans, and peas. They were grown in gardens and consumed both fresh and preserved. The diet also included mushrooms, berries, and wild plants gathered by women and children. Animal husbandry provided the village with meat, milk, cheese, and eggs. The main animals were cows, sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens. Meat was eaten less frequently due to its cost and storage difficulties, but was especially valued during holidays and important occasions. Dairy products were everyday food and an important source of nutrients. Village diets were seasonal and depended on the harvest and storage conditions. In winter, the diet became more meager, dominated by preserves, salted foods, and dried products. Food preservation methods included salting, smoking, and drying. Honey and dairy products played a key role in providing vitamins and energy. Culinary traditions in the village were simple and practical. Food was cooked over an open fire or hearth, sometimes using ovens. Spices and seasonings were used sparingly, mainly local herbs and salt. Besides everyday meals, the peasant community occasionally organized festive feasts, connected to religious and agricultural holidays. These events helped strengthen community bonds and maintain morale. Agriculture in the village was based on subsistence farming, where the main goal was to provide the family with food and necessary resources. The three-field system was used, with sowing and harvesting done by hand. The land was cultivated using simple tools, plows, hoes, and sickles. Livestock breeding was also an important part of the economy, providing not only food but also labor, oxen for plowing, and materials for crafts, wool, leather. Working the land was hard and required the joint efforts of all family and community members. Thus, food and agriculture in the medieval village were interconnected and reflected the level of societal development, natural conditions, and social realities. The diet and farming methods shaped the lifestyle and ensured the peasants' survival in the challenging conditions of the time. Crafts and production in the medieval village. Crafts in the medieval village held an important place, complementing agriculture and providing the population with necessary goods for everyday life. Although most inhabitants were engaged in farming, artisanal professions developed and contributed to the economic and cultural growth of the village. The main crafts included blacksmithing, pottery, weaving, leatherworking, carpentry, and woodworking. The blacksmith was one of the key masters in the village. He made and repaired tools for farming, agricultural implements, and horseshoes. The blacksmith's work required great skill and physical strength, and his workshop was usually located in the village center. Potters made ceramic dishes and building materials. Clay pottery was widespread and used for storage and cooking. Potters also made roof tiles and bricks for constructing houses and farm buildings. Weaving and spinning were female crafts closely linked to household chores. Women made fabrics from flax and wool creating clothing and household items. Looms and spinning wheels were simple but effective tools that allowed families to be supplied with clothing and trade surpluses at the market. Leatherworkers processed animal hides into durable leather for shoes, clothing, and belts. Footwear was an important item in the village, protecting feet from cold and injuries during fieldwork. Carpenters and woodworkers built houses, barns, fences, and other structures. Wood was one of the main materials in the village, and the skillful processing of wood played a key role in creating comfortable living conditions. Often, these specialists also made furniture and farming tools. Besides individual production, some villages had workshops where craftsmen joined together for cooperative work and training young apprentices. These workshops helped preserve and develop artisanal traditions and skills. Crafts had significant economic importance. Products could be sold at fairs and markets, providing additional income for peasant families. The exchange of craft goods for agricultural products supported the closed-loop economy, typical of the medieval village. Knowledge and skills in crafts were passed down orally and practically, often within families, ensuring the continuity of traditions and mastery. Despite limited technological progress at the time, village crafts were sufficiently developed to meet the vital needs of the community. Thus, crafts and production in the medieval village represented an important aspect of life, supporting economic self-sufficiency and social stability. They complemented agriculture, supplied necessary items, and contributed to the cultural development of village society. Social structures and hierarchy in the medieval village. The medieval village was organized within a complex social structure that defined the roles, responsibilities, and rights of its inhabitants. The hierarchy was clearly expressed and based on economic status, occupation, and legal standing, influencing the life of every member of the community. At the head of the village was the landlord or lord, the owner of the land on which the village stood. He had the right to judge, collect taxes, and demand labor services from the peasants. The landlord controlled the use of the land, allocated plots, and provided protection to the villagers, including military defense. His status was the highest in the hierarchy, and he enjoyed significant power and privileges. Below the landlord were the feudal tenants, peasants who rented land for payment or a portion of the harvest. They had some rights to the land, but were obligated to perform corvée labor, unpaid work on the lord's land, and pay rents, either in money or in kind. Peasants were divided into free and dependent. Free peasants owned their plots and could manage them, sell their produce, and move freely. Dependent peasants or serfs were tied to the land and had to fulfill various duties, lacking the right to leave the estate without permission. Within the village, social differentiation also existed. Wealthier households had more land, livestock, and laborers, granting them a higher status. Smaller and poorer families primarily engaged in subsistence farming and crafts, struggling to survive with limited resources. The community played a crucial role in regulating social relations. Councils of elders, elected from the most respected peasants, made decisions on land distribution, dispute resolution, and organizing collective work. These institutions maintained internal order and upheld traditions. Religious figures generally belonged to a separate social group. The priest, residing in the village or nearby parish, performed spiritual functions, provided moral support, and often participated in judicial and administrative matters. His role was important in both religious and social life. Women in the village had specific rights and duties related to household management, child care, and maintaining the family hearth. However, their social status was generally lower than that of men, and they rarely took part in public governance. Hierarchy and social structure were integral parts of medieval society, shaping behavior and interactions among people. They ensured stability and order, allowing the village community to function as a unified whole despite difficulties and contradictions. In conditions of constant external threats, economic hardships, and limited resources, such a structure was necessary for survival and development. Every person knew their place and role, which contributed to social harmony and the efficiency of agriculture. Hunting and fishing as a supplement to the economy in the medieval village. In the medieval village, agriculture was the main source of sustenance, but it rarely provided a varied and sufficient diet for the inhabitants. Therefore, hunting and fishing played an important role in supplementing the economy, helping to provide protein and diversity in the peasants' diet. Hunting in the village was not a widespread activity accessible to everyone. The main hunters were men who possessed the necessary skills and equipment for catching game. They hunted hares, birds, boars, and other wild animals living in the forests and woodlands around the village. However, hunting was often strictly regulated by feudal laws and privileges since the forest belonged to the lord or monastery, and illegal hunting could be punished with heavy fines or penalties. Various tools were used for hunting: bows, slings, spears, nets, and traps. Experienced hunters passed on their knowledge and skills to the younger generation, thus ensuring the continuity of traditions. Fishing was also an important activity. Villages were often located near rivers, lakes, and ponds, where fish was a valuable and accessible resource. Fish was caught using nets, fishing rods, and barriers. Fishing helped diversify the diet, especially during fasting periods and religious restrictions when meat consumption was prohibited. Beyond providing food, hunting and fishing had social and cultural significance. They helped strengthen community bonds, as they were often carried out collectively or as family activities. Hunting could also be an occasion for festivals and rituals related to gratitude for nature's gifts and successful labor. Hunting and fishing required physical training, knowledge of natural features, and seasonal changes, making them important parts of the life experience of medieval peasants. Despite limitations caused by feudal prohibitions and economic conditions, these activities greatly enriched the village economy and culture, providing essential resources and supporting the stability of the community as a whole. Diet and nutrition of peasants in the medieval village. The diet of medieval peasants was closely tied to their lifestyle, available resources, and social status. Their daily meals were simple and modest by modern standards, yet thoughtfully adapted to seasonal availability, product accessibility, and storage possibilities. The foundation of their diet was grains: rye, wheat, oats, and barley. These were used to prepare various porridges, flatbreads, bread, and beverages. Bread was the staple food, with its quality depending on local agriculture and access to mills. Peasant bread was typically coarse, often mixed with straw or other plant materials, making it less tasty but more filling. Porridges and soups made from grains and legumes were common main dishes. Vegetables such as cabbage, turnips, carrots, onions, and garlic were grown in gardens and supplemented the diet. These vegetables were usually eaten boiled or in stews, preserving their nutritional value. Meat was rare in the peasants' diet and considered a luxury, usually reserved for holidays or special occasions. The primary sources of animal protein were domestic livestock: cows, pigs, chickens, sheep, as well as fish and game. Meat was often smoked, salted, or dried to prolong its shelf life. Fish, as mentioned earlier, was an important dietary component, especially during fasting periods when meat was forbidden. Fishing and processing fish, salting, drying, allowed for long-term storage. The diet was also supplemented by fruits and berries gathered from forests and gardens. These were consumed fresh or preserved as jams, compotes, and other homemade preparations. Beverages included water, herbal infusions, weak kvass, mead, and beer, the latter being a popular and safe drink, since water was often contaminated. Peasant diets were closely influenced by religious fasting and holidays, which affected the type and quantity of consumed food. During fasts, meat and dairy were replaced with plant-based foods and fish. Although modest, the diet provided the necessary energy for hard physical labor. It reflected the peasants' connection to the land, the seasonality of agricultural work, and social constraints. Medicine and folk remedies in the medieval village. Health and treatment in the medieval village were closely tied to natural conditions, available knowledge, and limited resources. In the absence of modern medical institutions and specialists, peasants relied on folk remedies, rituals, and the experience of older generations to cope with illnesses, injuries, and everyday ailments. Medical help was most often provided by the population itself. Relatives, neighbors, or healers respected for their ability to use medicinal herbs and other natural materials. Doctors, in the usual sense, were almost non-existent, and monasteries, where some knowledge and experience could be found, were far from many villages. Folk medicine was based on the use of plants with healing properties: chamomile, calendula, St. John's wort, garlic, mint, and many others. Herbs were used to prepare decoctions, tinctures, compresses, and ointments that helped with colds, wounds, stomach disorders, and other illnesses. Healers also used magical rituals, charms, and amulets, believing in the power of spirits and nature, capable of healing or protecting against diseases. These practices were part of folk traditions and culture, combining religious and pagan elements. Special attention was given to hygiene, although its understanding and practice were far from modern standards. Water in wells and rivers was often contaminated, contributing to the spread of infections. Nevertheless, peasants tried to maintain cleanliness in the house and on the property, using herbs and hot water for washing. Childbirth and newborn care also took place at home, supervised by experienced women, midwives. Disease prevention included diet, rest, and limiting contact with the sick. Pandemics and epidemics, such as the plague, often claimed the lives of many villagers, and there were practically no ways to combat them. In such cases, the village might resort to collective prayers and church rituals. Despite limited medical knowledge, folk medicine and collective care for health helped many survive the harsh conditions of the Middle Ages, providing a minimal level of support and relief from suffering. Legal norms and village law. In the medieval village, legal norms and law played an important role in regulating social relations, maintaining order, and resolving conflicts. Law was an integral part of daily life but differed significantly from modern legal systems. Norms were mostly based on traditions, customs, and decisions of local authorities rather than codified laws. Village law was formed under the influence of feudal relations, church rules, and local customs. The main source of law was oral traditions embedded in customs passed down from generation to generation. Written legal codes existed primarily in towns and feudal courts, while village norms were more flexible and adapted to living conditions. The main subject of legal relations was the peasant collective, the community. It possessed a certain degree of autonomy and could establish its own rules regarding land use, taxes, resource distribution, and dispute resolution. Collective decisions, discussions, and agreements within the community were the most common. Legal matters were decided at assemblies, general meetings of village residents attended by elders, representatives of the feudal lord, and clergy. These gatherings addressed disputes, rule violations, property issues, and other conflicts. Sometimes officials such as elders responsible for maintaining order were elected during these assemblies. Village law regulated land use issues: who could cultivate land and how much, rules for shared use of common pastures and forests. Strict norms governed the payment of taxes and duties owed by peasants to their feudal lords. Punishments for breaking rules ranged from fines and compensation to corporal punishments. The law protected both the interests of the feudal lord and the rights of peasants, maintaining a balance of power and responsibility. Church law influenced family relations, marriages, moral issues, and religious ceremonies. Peasants were subject to church norms, especially regarding holidays, fasting, and marriage customs. An important feature of village law was its practical focus and close connection to everyday realities, which ensured the stability and survival of communities in the harsh conditions of the Middle Ages. Discipline and punishments. Discipline in the medieval village was an important element in maintaining order and the stability of the community. Life in the village was closely connected to the collective, and violating rules or duties could have serious consequences for the offender and the entire community. Therefore, certain measures were in place to uphold discipline, regulated both by local customs and feudal laws. Discipline covered various aspects of life: maintaining public order, fulfilling agricultural duties, paying taxes and obligations, as well as observing moral and religious norms. Violations of discipline ranged from minor offenses to serious crimes. Punishments were applied depending on the severity of the offense and could include fines, public reprimands, corporal punishments, and even exile from the community. Fines were most often imposed for minor infractions, such as failing to follow land use rules or disturbing public order. Public reprimands and admonishments were part of a system of social pressure, maintaining discipline through shame and fear of community disapproval. Such punishments often occurred at assemblies or in the presence of other villagers, enhancing their impact. Corporal punishments, such as whipping or beating with sticks, were used for more serious offenses: theft, perjury, violation of feudal duties. These could be imposed by the village elder or the feudal court. In some cases, harsher measures like imprisonment or forced labor were applied. Exile from the village was considered an extreme measure and meant effective social isolation, as without land and community, a person could not survive. It was used for especially serious crimes or repeated offenses. Religious norms also played a significant role in the disciplinary system. The church controlled moral behavior, and violating church rules could lead to ecclesiastical punishments, from public penance to excommunication. The disciplinary system in the village aimed not only at punishment but also at education, maintaining social harmony and order. It reflected the social and economic conditions of the Middle Ages, where collective life required strict adherence to norms for the survival and prosperity of the community. Marriages, kinship, and customs. In the medieval village, marriage and kinship played a fundamental role in the life of each individual and the entire community. They not only determined a person's social status and rights, but also ensured the stability and development of the rural society. The family was considered the basic unit of society, and marital unions served as a means of preserving property, strengthening social ties, and passing on traditions. Marriages were most often arranged between families, with personal feelings being secondary to economic, social, and political interests. Parents usually had significant influence over the choice of a partner for their children, striving to secure advantageous alliances that could strengthen the family's position within the community. Sometimes negotiations or exchanges took place to agree on the marriage terms. The church exerted considerable influence over marriage ceremonies and norms. From the Middle Ages onward, marriage was regarded as a sacrament, enhancing its sacred significance. Religious rituals formalized the union, and the church enforced rules such as prohibiting marriages between close relatives, requiring mutual consent, and mandating marital fidelity. Various customs related to marriage were widely practiced in the village. Before the wedding, special rituals symbolized the transition from childhood to adulthood, preparation for family responsibilities, and entry into the community as a full member. Wedding celebrations could last several days, accompanied by songs, dances, games, and feasts. Kinship extended far beyond the immediate family and included extended relatives such as cousins, nephews, uncles, and others. These ties were important for mutual aid, cooperative farming, and protecting the community's interests. Inheritance rights and the transfer of property were critical aspects of kinship relations. Land, tools, and livestock were passed down, ensuring the family's economic stability. In the absence of direct heirs, property could revert to the community or the feudal lord. Ancestor veneration traditions and family celebrations held special importance, uniting family members and strengthening their sense of belonging to the lineage. Such rituals involved recounting stories about ancestors, their deeds, and family history, preserving generational continuity. Thus, marriage and kinship in the medieval village were not merely personal matters, but important social institutions, regulating community relationships and ensuring its stability and development. Customs and traditions connected to marriages reflected the spiritual and cultural values of the time, helping preserve identity and communal spirit. Architecture and layout of the village. The architecture and layout of a medieval village reflected both the practical needs of the peasant community and the social and economic conditions of the time. A village was usually a compact settlement located near arable fields, meadows, forests, and water sources, providing residents with convenient access to land and necessary natural resources. The village layout was shaped by the terrain, climate, and traditions. Often, the village had a linear or compact, scattered structure, with houses situated along the main road or around a central square. The central square served as a place for gatherings, trade, and community events, and could also be a site for religious ceremonies and festivals. Residential houses in villages were built from locally available materials, most often wood, stone, or clay, depending on the region. Houses were 1 or 2 stories tall, with thatched or wooden roofs designed to protect against rain, snow, and wind. Inside, there were 1 or several rooms, often with a hearth in the center for cooking and heating. Besides residential buildings, the village included farm structures, granaries for storing grain, sheds for tools, and barns for livestock. These buildings were usually located near the house or in separate yards, ensuring convenience for farming activities and property protection. The village layout also considered security. Houses and buildings were arranged in a way that facilitated defense in case of attack. Villages were often surrounded by fences, palisades, or earthen walls with ditches. In some cases, the central feature was a castle or manor of the feudal lord, who provided protection and control over the territory. Water supply was organized through wells and springs, located in accessible spots. An important part of village infrastructure included roads and paths, connecting the village to neighboring settlements, markets, and the church. The overall architecture of the village reflected its economic specialization. For example, fishing villages had buildings for storing gear and fish, while agricultural villages featured spacious granaries and fields. Over time, architecture evolved to include new elements such as mills, smithies, and chapels. Thus, the architecture and layout of the village were not only the result of practical needs, but also a reflection of social structure, cultural traditions, and natural conditions, ensuring the stability and viability of medieval rural communities. Water supply and sanitation. In the medieval village, water supply and sanitation played a crucial role in ensuring the health and survival of the population. Despite the limited technical capabilities of the time, communities found ways to organize access to clean water and maintain relative cleanliness, which was essential for preventing disease and sustaining a basic standard of living. The main sources of water in most villages were wells, streams, springs, and nearby rivers or lakes. Wells were dug by hand, often quite deep, to reach underground water layers. Their locations were chosen based on accessibility for all residents and safety from contamination. Wells were often protected with fences and covers to prevent debris or animals from falling in. Water supply was rarely centralized. Typically, each household or family collected water from the nearest available source. Buckets, jugs, and other simple containers were used for this purpose. During hot seasons and droughts, water shortages became a serious issue, impacting both agriculture and everyday needs. Sanitation in the village was primitive, but essential for maintaining public health. Waste was disposed of in designated pits, ditches, or small trenches located at a distance from homes and water sources. Since there was no centralized sewage system, cleanliness depended on the awareness of villagers and their adherence to local customs and rules. Public latrines were extremely rare. Most households had their own primitive toilets, often located in the yard or in small outbuildings. These facilities were usually positioned downwind from the village to minimize odors and prevent contamination of residential areas. Particular attention was paid to water cleanliness, as polluted water could cause outbreaks of diseases such as dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. Religious and folk traditions often included purification rituals, prayers for health, and taboos against polluting water sources. Bathing and laundry were usually done at rivers and streams, which also affected water quality. Only selected water, sometimes boiled or filtered when possible, was used for drinking. Special clay vessels were often used to store water, helping to keep it cool and clean. In some wealthier or larger villages, primitive water supply systems gradually emerged. Canals, water wheels, and small cisterns made water access easier and reduced the risk of contamination. Thus, water supply and sanitation in the medieval village represented a complex set of practices, traditions, and limited technological solutions aimed at preserving health and supporting the survival of rural populations in the face of constant natural and social challenges. Traditions and craft festivals. Traditions and craft festivals occupied a central place in the life of the medieval village. These events were not only moments of rest from hard labor, but also crucial opportunities for strengthening the community, passing down knowledge, reinforcing social bonds, and preserving cultural identity. They were deeply rooted in the agricultural cycle, religious rituals, seasonal changes, and the villagers' trades. Most village festivals were timed to coincide with key points in the agricultural calendar: sowing, harvesting, gathering crops, and the beginning of the herding season. For example, upon the completion of the harvest, villagers would hold harvest festivals with songs, dances, communal meals, and Thanksgiving rituals. These occasions held deep symbolic meaning. Peasants would give thanks to nature, to God, and to the land for its fertility, and hoped for continued favor in the future. Craft festivals, on the other hand, were held in honor of specific trades: blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, potters, and other artisans. These often coincided with the feast days of saints, associated with certain crafts, such as Saint Joseph for carpenters. During these festivals, villagers organized fairs, workshops, skill demonstrations, and the exchange of knowledge and goods. The festivals were accompanied by folk games, theatrical performances, parades, and ritual ceremonies. Masquerades were especially popular. Participants dressed in handmade costumes, portraying animals, spirits, and mythical beings. These actions were both entertaining and magical in meaning, believed to ward off evil spirits and ensure fertility and well-being. Music and dance traditions played an important role as well. Songs were performed with the accompaniment of simple instruments like flutes, tambourines, and fiddles. Folk dances, in which everyone from children to elders participated, symbolized village unity. Often these performances turned into friendly competitions between neighboring villages, fostering community pride and inter-village cooperation. Festivals also became the occasion for engagements, weddings, resolving disputes, and signing agreements. Community assemblies were sometimes held during these periods to address matters such as land conflicts, taxes, and the division of responsibilities. Therefore, festivals served not only as entertainment, but also as a form of social regulation. Preparation for festivals took significant time and effort. Women prepared food, sewed garments, and decorated homes and streets. Men built performance platforms, gathered firewood, and brought supplies. Youth rehearsed songs and dances and prepared ritual games. This collective labor strengthened a sense of responsibility and belonging within the community. In some cases, Festivals took the form of fairs. Merchants, artisans, and peasants from nearby areas would come to the village. These markets were accompanied by feasting, sharing news, and forging new connections. They also facilitated the spread of new crafts, ideas, clothing styles, and even innovations in farming practices. Over time, traditions became more complex and evolved, partly under the influence of the church, royal authorities, and population migration. Some ancient customs were transformed but retained their core: respect for labor, remembrance of ancestors, and connection to nature. Thus, traditions and craft festivals in the medieval village were an integral part of social life, blending material, spiritual, and cultural dimensions into a unified whole. They filled daily life with meaning and reinforced the collective identity of the rural community. The impact of climate change on village life. Climate played a crucial role in the life of a medieval village, as agriculture, the foundation of both the economy and survival, was entirely dependent on weather conditions. Even minor shifts in climate could lead to severe consequences: crop failures, famine, epidemics, and mass migrations. Throughout the Middle Ages, Europe experienced periods of both relative stability and dramatic climate changes, which left a deep imprint on rural life. One of the most significant climatic phenomena of the period was the so-called Little Ice Age, approximately the 13th to the 19th centuries, the early signs of which began to appear in the late 13th century. A sudden drop in average annual temperatures, particularly in northern and western Europe, led to colder winters, prolonged rainfall, and a shortened growing season. This had a direct impact on crop yields. Fields failed to sprout properly, grain could not fully ripen, and livestock suffered as hay, and pastures were damaged by dampness or frost. Agricultural problems triggered a chain reaction. The decline in food production caused bread prices to rise, led to widespread malnutrition, and weakened the population's immune systems. This, in turn, made villagers more vulnerable to epidemics such as plague and typhus. One of the most tragic consequences of climate change was the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, which affected much of Europe and claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands. For 3 consecutive years, harvests failed, livestock perished from hunger, and there were reports of cannibalism and theft becoming disturbingly common. Amid climate hardship, social and cultural shifts also occurred. People often explained famines and disasters as divine punishment or the result of witchcraft, which led to a rise in religious fanaticism and witch hunts. The church responded with mass prayers, processions, and days of repentance in hopes of appeasing the heavens. Many villages, especially those located on high ground or in vulnerable areas near swamps, mountains, or flood zones, were either severely damaged or completely abandoned. People relocated to safer regions, leading to internal migration, changes in trade routes, and transformations in land ownership boundaries. Climatic challenges also encouraged agricultural adaptation. Some peasants began experimenting with new strains of grain more resistant to cold and moisture. Crop rotation became more common. New techniques for draining wetlands and protecting fields from frost were introduced. Granaries and barns were built to store food and fodder longer and to protect them from spoilage. Crafts also suffered, particularly those dependent on weather, such as weaving, leatherworking, and pottery. Constant humidity interfered with drying materials, reducing output and quality. Wood needed for construction and fuel was often too wet to use, and muddy roads made transportation impossible for months at a time. Nevertheless, despite all the hardships, medieval villages demonstrated remarkable resilience. People found ways to adapt, altering work routines, forming tighter-knit communities, improving weather prediction through natural observation, and developing local calendars to track seasonal patterns. Thus, climate change had a powerful and multifaceted impact on rural life. It shaped not only economic and demographic developments, but also the worldview of the people, their fears, hopes, and ways of interacting with the environment. The village's ability to adapt and survive in the face of climatic disasters became one of the most vital aspects of its long-term resilience. The development of technology and its impact on village life. Technological development in the Middle Ages progressed slowly but steadily, and over time, its influence on village life became increasingly significant. Although the medieval village is often perceived as traditional, isolated, and technologically conservative, in reality, peasants gradually adopted and adapted new tools, devices, and methods that greatly improved labor productivity and living conditions. One of the most important innovations was the widespread adoption of the heavy plow, especially in northern Europe, where the soil was clay-rich and difficult to cultivate. Unlike the lighter Roman plows, the heavy plow with its iron blade could deeply turn the soil and aerate it more effectively. This made it possible to cultivate new lands and increase crop yields, particularly in Germanic, Scandinavian, and Slavic regions. Equally important was the introduction of the three-field crop rotation system, which replaced the older two-field method. This system divided the land into three parts: one sown with winter crops, one with spring crops, and one left fallow. It allowed soil to recover, reduced the risk of nutrient depletion, and made it possible to harvest more frequently. Though this method required greater coordination within the community, it led to a sustainable increase in food production. Progress also affected animal husbandry. Improvements in the construction of pens, barns, and watering systems enabled better care of livestock. Water mills and windmills began to appear, particularly in the flat regions of the Netherlands and France. These machines were used not only for grinding grain, but also for pressing oil, processing wool, and even extracting salt. Having a mill elevated a village's economic standing and significantly lightened daily labor. Another important advancement was the use of the horse collar and horseshoes. Unlike older neck harnesses that choked the animal, the new collars allowed horses, not just oxen, to be used effectively for plowing and hauling. Horseshoes protected hooves from injury, especially on rocky or muddy roads. This expanded the use of horses as the primary means of transportation and work in the countryside. Noteworthy changes also occurred in construction. New woodworking methods, stronger joinery techniques, and the use of lime mortar made peasant homes more durable, warmer, and better suited to withstand harsh weather. The growth of artisan workshops, carpenters, blacksmiths, potters, led to higher quality and more plentiful tools, cookware, and household goods. The development of writing and broader use of parchment and later paper had a noticeable impact as well. Although literacy remained low among peasants, monasteries and noble courts passed down technological knowledge, designs of tools, fertilizer recipes, and descriptions of agricultural practices. Some prosperous village communities even hired scribes to maintain land records, tenancy agreements, and tax registers. Medical technology was in its infancy, but peasants used improved herbal remedies, sought advice from local healers, and employed simple surgical instruments. Folk medicine was gradually enriched by knowledge from monasteries and practices brought from the East via crusaders and traders. Thus, even though technological change progressed slowly, it transformed rural life, increasing efficiency, reducing physical strain, and making village economies more resilient to climatic, social, and demographic challenges. These innovations laid the groundwork for further transformations that would become even more evident during the transition to the early modern period. The transition from the Middle Ages to the early modern period. Changes in village life. The transition from the Middle Ages to the early modern period, roughly spanning the 14th to 16th centuries, marked a time of profound change in all areas of life, including the countryside. Although many transformations began in cities with the rise of trade, capitalism, humanism, and centralized state power, their influence gradually reached rural areas as well, reshaping peasant life, economic relations, and the overall worldview. One of the most significant factors of transformation was the demographic catastrophe caused by plagues, particularly the Black Death of 1347 to 1351. Millions of people perished, resulting in a severe labor shortage. This allowed peasants to demand better working conditions, reduced obligations, and increased tenancy freedoms. In some areas, this led to temporary emancipation, where peasants effectively became free tenants of the land. Major uprisings, such as the English Peasants' Revolt, 1381, the French Jacquerie, and the German Peasants' War, 1524 to 1525, reflected growing discontent with feudal oppression. Though these rebellions were suppressed, they forced nobles and monarchs to begin addressing rural grievances to avoid further unrest. Legal and social reforms, though slow, gradually changed the nature of peasant subjugation. Simultaneously, agriculture began to commercialize. With the expansion of trade routes and the rise of market economies, producers increasingly oriented their work not only towards self-sufficiency, but also towards surplus production for sale. Some villages began to specialize, for example, in flax, sheep, or vineyards. This led to a growing stratification within rural communities. Wealthier peasants accumulated capital, while poorer ones lost land and became wage laborers. Spiritual life was also affected. The Reformation, beginning in the early 16th century, shattered the religious unity of Europe. In many villages, monasteries were closed and their lands were redistributed. This deprived peasants of old forms of charity and medical care, but also relieved them from tithes in Protestant regions. New Protestant forms of faith emerged, in which the peasant became more independent in spiritual matters. Migration increased. Some peasants moved to cities, becoming artisans or workers in early manufactories. Others set out for colonies, especially in the New World. The village was no longer the only world available to a person. It became part of a broader, increasingly globalized space. At the same time, traditional structures endured. Festivals, customs, land use patterns, and even architecture remained recognizable. However, the spirit of the era had changed. Peasants no longer saw their fate as predetermined. They began to make choices, protest, negotiate, and relocate, exercising agency that had been largely unavailable before. The transition to the early modern period did not destroy the village, but it transformed it. The village lost its isolation and became entangled in market, political, and religious processes. The medieval village was fading, making way for a new kind of rural life, more dynamic, complex, and interconnected with the wider world.